Hello and welcome to the Templar Report with your standing guest presenter, Nick Griffin. Great to see you here. And as you notice, we've started bang on time. That's what happens when the English are in charge, you see. Mr. Dowson will be with you tomorrow, so he tells me. We hope so, because I won't be here. So what should we do? Let's have a look and see who's in the room, shall we? Let's just get to this. Who's in first? Christopher Mashioka. In first, Paul Telford in early from sunny Liverpool. Niles Revegs, Mark Anthony Smith, Ralph Rowley, Tim Schroeder. Paul Telford. Paul has just received news that his daughter's with child. This will be Paul's 21st grandchild. That is the way to do it. I'm going to be talking more about this sort of thing, although not Paul specifically, later on. Fantastic, Paul. Congratulations. Well done. And of course, particularly congratulations to the mum and dad. Let's carry on. Who else have we got here? Clinton Dixon, hello from Texas. Andy McBride, Mark Anthony Smith, Miss Sherry B, First Lady in. Wee Mouse, Second Lady in. Alan Joxer Cattrall, Philip Milne, H. Johansson. Who else have we got? Joe from Glasgow. Tara Templeton, Jim Young, Malcolm Cook, Gary Hardwick, Colette Whitney, Barclay Burker. Pierre R, James Reft, Lady Rother. Lady Rother, what I had last night was sea bass and a very simple risotto, not mealworms. It was very good. Templar Guard from Leicester, oh dear, in occupied territory. Templar Guard, I guess that's a reason to use a pseudonym. Ain't a particularly nice place. It used to be, but not anymore. Stuart Duncan, Joseph Taylor. Have we had Kenneth Driver already? I'm not sure. Krista Strigg, we haven't. Stuart Bowden. Troy Otto. Jacob Lewis, this is a good-looking show. Greg G, Brian Payton, Scorpion, William Mumford, Peter Smith, Land Mammal. Probably not your real name in Minnesota. Good job this isn't Jim. Clinton Dixon, hello there. Conrad Broom, Paul Walker from New Zealand. Early, I guess. McBride, congratulations to Paul, absolutely so. Right, I'm going to crack on with this. If you're in the room and I haven't seen you, you are very welcome indeed, as indeed are everybody else and the viewers, the many viewers who'll be joining us over particularly the few hours and the few days ahead. The viewings on the shows go up really quite steadily. Now, we're not going to be going across to Purge tonight. I've got nothing terribly controversial to say. We want to keep some meat on YouTube to attract people. And also the techie guy has been doing some tremendous work on Purge today. You may have seen we had some buffering problems yesterday, and what he's been working on today is a switch around so that Purge will be available for mobiles. I don't think you've got to do anything. If you have, no doubt he'll correct me. But it'll be without buffering, so it'll be much more efficient. So that'll help us to build the audience there without any problems. If just one thing, if you can hear, if I stay quiet a minute, don't know if you can hear a sort of rushing noise. Perhaps you can, perhaps you can't. I can hear it here very much. So we've got a brook out running alongside the house here, and it's going wild at the moment. It's not a brook, it's a torrent. Quite dramatic, no risk of flooding, but it's quite a noisy thing when it's behaved like this. We've had some torrential rain here in the Shropshire Hills. And I can hear it anyway, even if you can't. Right, now, first thing up. You might remember, if you were with us yesterday, that I mentioned a little bit about how revolutions always devour their children, and in particular how in the French Revolution, the mother of them all in 1789, it was really started by wealthy liberals. They were the ones who wanted to get rid of the king and got rid of the king, and they had some real crazy hard leftists as allies. And within 2 years, the crazy hard leftists were guillotining the moderate liberals, and quite right and proper too, I would say. Talking about then, not today's modern liberals. I wouldn't wish any harm on any modern liberal in any way, shape or form, especially as we are on YouTube. But anyway, coming on to this, I told you that yesterday, that sooner or later, the rabble, the BLM types and the Antifa types especially, would start to turn on the likes of Zuckerberg, Bezos, Bill Gates and the rest of them. And Mr. Techie, if we can have this, the one thing I got to the Techie Guy to show today, this is a video clip which I picked up this morning. Have a look at this. This was in the USA, and you look at the graffiti there, criticising Bezos. This is just the other day, Antifa, and they have guillotine Bezos. Isn't that quite remarkable? So, as I say, I saw that today, having told you yesterday that it wouldn't be very long before the hard left start turning on and trying to devour the liberals. So, couldn't happen to a nicer man. The man who's probably made more money out of the COVID crisis, should we say, on YouTube, more money on out of the COVID thing than anybody else on the planet, and he's been heavily involved with this clique of Silicon Valley liberals who are pushing the whole of the Great Reset thing, this revolution against normal society, and there we are already. They're after him. Couldn't happen to a nicer man. Who will win? I don't know. Sometimes in these revolutions, the hardliners win. They tend to be more ruthless. On the other hand, the liberal types have a lot more money, and if they are ruthless enough, they'll simply do away with the hardliners. We will see. Do I care? Not really. Not really. Let them all be killed and let God sort them out. We know where they're going, so it doesn't bother me which side wins. But there will be those two sides, and they will fight sooner or later. How are we doing for time? 6 minutes past. So, a few bits from the sort of the minor headlines today. Obviously, in the USA, it's still all the very early fallout from the changeover. And a note that filmmaker Michael Moore has demanded that, threatened Trump, saying, we're not finished with you yet. And he's insisted that Trump should be tried, convicted, and put in prison. He's not the only one. You'll have seen probably, I think it was yesterday, Nancy Pelosi saying that Trump should face trial for sedition. Now, sedition, I'm not sure in American law, but in British law, it's an inch away from treason. And I think that America still has the death penalty for treason. So they haven't been in power for 24 hours, and they're already getting perilously close to talking about trying and potentially executing the previous president, who got 10 million more genuine votes than he had when he was actually elected. An enormously popular man. Not popular with the left, not popular with some of the crazy far right, and he didn't do everything right. He made some terrible mistakes and some terrible decisions. But he was a hugely popular president, and he's a hugely popular loser. And they're talking about prison or worse. These people are mad. Dangerously, dangerously mad. What else have we got? Joe Biden. Speak here from the horse's mouth himself. He's made it clear he's already acted to demolish Trump's legacy. So he's made it clear he's signing back up to the climate agreements, which adds a further enormous amount of pressure on industry in America, manufacturing industry and agriculture, particularly and livestock farming, that in order to comply with the agreements within all this international climate change stuff, basically industry has to be crippled. Even you'll get things like in Britain, even hospitals, even our health service hospitals, so government-owned, state-owned hospitals have to pay vast amounts of money, hundreds of thousands of pounds each hospital every year, just to release carbon dioxide from their heating systems into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, the most important natural fertilizer on this planet, but they're being charged, and so people are paying money for the health service, thinking it's for the health service. It's actually going to the climate change parasites. That's coming to America. These things are expensive. Trump said he's going to start refunding the World Health Organization. That's hundreds of millions more of your taxpayers' dollars every year going down the drain. He's announced that transgender people are going to be allowed forward to serve in the military. And he's got a transgender Rachel Levine, born Richard Levine, as his deputy health secretary. So you can see where it's going in terms of the LGBTQ plus agenda. But this business about letting transgenders into the military is part of a bigger and really sinister Democrat plan for the military. And you will see probably they'll do it pretty quickly, that just as Obama got rid of a lot of the old-fashioned generals, so there'll be a further wave of golden goodbyes and enforced departures, if necessary, for every single man, or woman even, but it'll mainly be men, of the old guard, men who are loyal to the Constitution, men who are loyal genuinely to the United States, and because they're loyal to the Constitution, who would not, for instance, brook have the military being used to crush people defending the Second Amendment. So there will be purges in the military, and this is not primarily about whether or not a general is supportive or not of transgenders serving under him. This is about weeding out the generals who would not be reliable, who cannot be relied upon to either stand by or even enforce this leftist revolution. That's what they'll be doing. It's the same if you're a student of recent history in South Africa. In the couple of years before F.W. de Klerk sold out the South African whites and moderate blacks to the Marxist extremists and put South Africa on the road to where it is now, on the point of complete genocide of the last whites there, and being turned into it's already an economic basket case where they can't even keep the electricity on every single night. So before he set about that betrayal, he purged the army of all officers who he knew would resist. That's what's going to be happening here. Now let's have a little look here on who's saying what just recently. Have we got any newses? Any news from anyone? What have we got? Mark Anthony Smith having to leave because he's got to go on his oxygen tonight. Good luck for you there, Mark Anthony Smith. Yes, Paul Walker asks, are there enough cash cows left to fund the madness? No, there aren't enough cash cows left to fund the madness, but the madness is about crashing the economy, so it doesn't matter. We're no longer dealing with people who just have crazy ideas and want to make them work. We're dealing with people who have crazy ideas about stopping things working. So they don't care about the cash cows. They will milk them to death. Right. And then final bit on this in terms of headlines, a little bit more moving towards the European side of the pond. And the EU Commissioner President Ursula von der Leyen has expressed her delight that after a long 4 years, Europe has a friend in the White House again. The European Union has a friend in the White House again. Europe and the peoples of Europe most definitely do not. But even more worrying than just the craziness it shows is running the European Union as well, just in case you didn't know that already. Even worse, her comments that the EU and the United States must ensure that hate messages and fake news can no longer be spread unchecked. That's her demand. Backed up by EU Internal Market Commissioner Thierry Breton, who also recently spoke of the need for stricter state controls of speech to combat alleged extremism. And he's called on the Biden administration to join forces as, quote, allies of the free world to develop a new global approach to online platforms. So it's not just enough that online platforms are massively restricted in, for instance, Germany or in France, but it's got to be worldwide. That's what the EU are saying to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and I'm sure they're pushing an open door, as lawyers would say. And finally, the Vatican's already shown it agrees with thought police because it intervened on Inauguration Day to stop, this was news to me, I guess it will be to you because the controlled media haven't talked about it. The Vatican intervened to stop the release of a statement by the US bishops sharply criticising Joe Biden's policies as being in direct contradiction of church doctrines. Well, thank God that somebody has said it. And not just somebody, not just some hardline preacher, not just Jim Dowson in one of the rants. This was said in a formal statement put out by the US bishops on the same day that before he went to be inaugurated, Biden went along and pretended to be a Catholic and attended Mass. So the January 20th statement signed by the president of the US Conference of Catholic Bishops, Archbishop Jose Gomez, stated that the new US president is committed to pursuing certain policies that would advance moral evils and threaten life and dignity, particularly in the area of abortion, contraception, marriage, and gender. As I say, thank God that someone and a whole block of the church has said it like it really is. But of course, Americans aren't to be told about it because the mass media don't allow it. And I guess within 6 or 8 months, the bishops of the United States would make that sort of comment at some peril to themselves, because what they've just said there will be classed as hate speech, despite the fact that it's completely in line with traditional Christian teaching of 2,000 years, with the Bible itself. It's hate speech, and it's going to be banned under Joe Biden and the European Union. You mark my words. Now then, it's just gone 6:15. Of course, I could have found more headlines, but headlines to a degree, very often it's bad news, and it's a bit of a drag, bit of a grind in the end. So I've got a treat for you. As I said yesterday, this is a chapter, a redacted chapter, parts of a chapter from the new book, Resistance to the Great Reset. This chapter, I've picked out sections. I guess this is about half of it, probably, perhaps even less than that. I'll just fill in the gaps where I've got gaps. So I'll be reading it. So I'll be looking slightly over there instead of at you. If you're on a mobile phone, you probably couldn't tell anyway. But there you go. I couldn't remember this. I am not an actor. I'm just an ordinary bloke. So I'm reading it to you. And then where I fill in the gaps, obviously, I won't be reading it to you. So here we go. This is a chapter entitled The Laughter of Our Children, which some will recognise, and especially our Irish comrades on the show tonight will recognise as a quote from former deceased IRA man Bobby Sands, who gave this brilliant, fantastic speech and quote in which he said, "Our revenge will be the laughter of our children." Amen. It is everywhere. Here we go. The power of compound arithmetic is as awesome in demographics as it is in the world of finance. Just as compound interest can ruin the borrower and make the already wealthy fabulously rich, so the impact of demographic change, compounded through as little as 3 generations, just 75 years, can destroy a seemingly unchallengeable majority and set a new people in their place. To illustrate this, let us do some very rough and ready maths with the very different birth rates of American liberals and their diametric opposites in the grassroots Protestant quiverful movement. Do please bear in mind as you read this that it is not intended to be a precise blueprint for the overall resistance movement, which it is our sacred duty to assist in building. Its purpose is to illustrate the awesome power of demography to change politics and history, and to inspire you and all our readers to make the personal choices which would enable you to do your bit. That may be by raising a large family yourself, being part of the education of younger members of your extended family, helping to build a broader Christian nationalist community in which families can thrive, or helping provide the Templar Order with resources to advance our own work in this vital field. Whichever route or combination of routes you decide upon, you will be helping, among other things, to spread the ideas and life-giving efforts described in this chapter to a wider audience. You will be a soldier in the demographic war against the liberal plague. Let us start by considering the liberals. While these deluded but dangerous creatures may be found in all walks of life, they're naturally concentrated in certain professions. Pause and think for a moment on them. If you had to predict which occupations would contain the highest proportion of liberals, which would you choose? Whatever your own precise list, I'm sure we can agree that journalists, higher education professors, advertising agency staff, and community activists could all easily feature in such a rogues gallery. Now let's take a brief look at how many people work in those jobs. For the sake of this illustration, we will examine the situation in the United States. Although the remarkable lesson it teaches about the demographic power of differential birth rates is valid in every country and among every population on Earth. So, coming off the direct quotes, direct quoting there, what I then go on to say in this is to look at these different, mainly liberal professions, which come to assuming all lawyers to be liberals, which I know is not true. There's some conservative parasites out there as well. with apologies to any decent lawyer happens to be watching this. As you know, you are a very, very rare beast indeed. So, classing all the lawyers in as the Liberals, we get to about 3 million with those. So I then top it up with several other groups. I can't quite remember what offhand, but it comes to a total that there's about 4 million Liberal leftists that we can identify really easily. Go back to the book. They're not alone, of course. There are many other Liberals and leftists occupying many other key positions in society. And many of the commanding heights of the economy, particularly in finance and corporate boardrooms, are hardcore right-wingers in economic terms. Yet they are every bit as dangerous to the social fabric and moral health of the nation. But if those 4 million Liberals were to vanish, America's coming dark night of repression, collective insanity, hatred, and ultimate disaster simply could not take place, because the left simply would not have the cadres, the officer class, necessary to steamroller through their revolutionary agenda. As a matter of fact, if those 4 million disappeared and were replaced by 4 million right-wing Christians, then even without taking away Joe Biden's millions of questionable votes, doesn't say that in the text, the 81 million allegedly cast for the Democrats would slip to 77 million, while the 74 million genuinely given to Donald Trump would rise to 78 million. So Donald Trump would have won. So how are we going to kill 4 million Liberals? We're not. Don't censor us. We're not. Definitely. Guaranteed. In fact, we're not going to kill a single one of them, unless they start a civil war, in which case they're liable to get what they're asking for. They are going to kill themselves. And where could America find an extra 4 million conservative Christians to replace them? By making them, by having children and rearing them right. So, having looked at these Liberals, and there's 4 million of them, the book goes on to look at some rather unusual Christians, or, as could be said more accurately, the unusually Christian Christians of the Quiverful movement. The name comes from Psalm 127, verses 3 to 5. Lo, children are an heritage of the law, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hands of a mighty man, so are the children of your youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. Now that speak with, it should be noted, is something of a euphemism. It means to kick the out of them. So a large family is seen as a quiver full of arrows, ready to be fired at the enemies of your folk and our Lord. And the American Quiverful movement encourages married couples to have as many children as God decides they should have. We've calculated that the cultural war battle stations of the main liberal professions are manned by 4 million people. Every demographic study confirms what we all know from personal experience. They are overwhelmingly liberal and upper class, and as such, or upper middle class, and as such, they have the lowest birth rate of all the USA's 328 million people. The exact figures now are impossible to determine, but for the sake of keeping the maths simple, we won't go far wrong if we work on the basis that half of the 4 million are women, and that despite all the feminism, lesbians, female to male transitions, infertile anorexics, and so on, they will have an average of 1 child each. Assuming each of these children has a different father, that makes 1 child per 2 liberal adults, giving them a total of 2 million children to form their second breeding generation. Cohort's the word used by demographers. That's 1 million couples for the next time around in 25 years. On our side of the fence, we start with the low median of the nation estimate for quiverful families. They say there's at least 100,000, could be more than that, a lot more. Taking their normal average of 7 children per family, that gives them 70,000 children in their second generation. In the second generation, the 1 million liberal couples produce 500,000 children, i.e. 250,000 breeding couples who produce 250,000 children for the third generation. I'm sorry this is maths, and if you're like me, it goes straight over your head, but when you see it in the book, it's much easier to grasp. We'll err on the side of pessimism and assume that 20,000 of the Quiverful's 70,000 children are lost into the mainstream, leaving 50,000 adults to form 25,000 families, who, at 7 children each, produce 175,000 children. While the numbers have already shifted very radically, it's always the third generation of rapid demographic trends which make the real difference. If the descendants of the original 4 million liberals continue the same habit as their parents and grandparents, and given the tendency of only children to go on to have small families themselves, that's very likely, the 250,000 liberals form 125,000 breeding pairs, who between them have a mere 125,000 children. In that same third generation, by contrast, the Christian Quiverful families explode in numbers. Let us again build some pessimism into the figures. We'll assume that 25,000 of this generation drop out. Some may even end up as slow breeding liberals. That leaves 150,000 individuals to form 75,000 loving families. Families which again do nothing more unusual than rejecting contraception and having 7 children. A figure which is still actually fewer, a lot fewer, than the natural human average. They will produce 525,000 children. And that is how 100,000 Christian families outbreed 4 million liberals, and it takes just 3 breeding generations, a mere 75 years, to do it. Quite remarkable. And as it says in the book, these aren't unrealistic. This is not some network marketing thing. This is what actually happens, and the Quiverful Christians have already done it for a generation. The Amish have already done it for several generations. The Mennonites and others. The Orthodox Jews do it as well. It's entirely normal amongst people who have faith in their God and people who are determined not to disappear. Entirely normal behaviour. However, getting near the end of these extracts now, I hope it's interesting you, enthusing you, and encouraging you to think, I'm going to buy that book as soon as possible. And if you haven't yet bought this one, Deus Vult, some of the same ideas that I'm talking about today, and which are going to be in this new book, they're also in here, but in very different forms. They reinforce each other. You're not going to be reading the same thing. You're not going to be reading repetition. You're reading things coming from a different angle, reinforcing these really vital messages. So let me just continue this. It's worth noting that this process is already underway, and it's a broader thing than just 10,000 Christian families and 4 million particularly obnoxious and powerful liberals. The higher fertility rate of US red states over blue states is a factor of recognised political significance. The same may be seen in most of the world. Conservative religious people tend to have bigger families than their secular counterparts. Regardless of ethnic group and the actual religion in question, religious belief is the best predictor of larger than usual families, while atheism is a very good predictor of hedonistic selfishness and childlessness or small families. Radical Muslims and Orthodox Jews are also outbreeding their own moderates. The future is more conservative, more separated. And while this is likely to deepen and revive fault lines between religions, it also means that liberalism will be under assault from all sides. And since it is liberalism which has so undermined our people's will and ability to resist our dispossession, that is the most important thing at present. As we make clear in both Deus Vult and in other chapters in this sequel, it is of course not enough merely to have children. It is also necessary to rear them right. Indeed, it's self-evident that this is the key to maintaining the high group birth rate for 3 or 4 generations, and which is the only realistic road back for the white Christian nations of the world. The fundamental building blocks of such a movement are threefold. First, given what we know about religious faith being at the basis of a healthy desire for large numbers of children, Christian belief. Second, the institution of the family. Third, a broader community of like-minded families. For this is essential to provide good examples, mutual support, and the various institutions needed to make this way of life normal, sustainable, and attractive. It takes a man, It takes a family, preferably an extended family, to raise a child. But it takes a network of villages to make him a man, and a family man at that. Right at the start of our collective push to encourage the next generation to have more children, therefore, we need to be ploughing effort, mental energy, money and love into building that in real life support network. Mother and toddler groups, self-sufficiency clubs, scout groups, homeschoolers weekend clubs and sports associations, social structures, musical bands, choirs, concerts, survival weekends, schools for manly skills and womanly knowledge, music festivals, churches, training centres, pubs, cafes and restaurants, mutual trading registers, credit unions. The list is almost endless, and every little failure, as well as every big success, will widen and deepen the wisdom, experience and collective skill set of this broad, decentralised movement. Now, the book goes on towards the end of this chapter to discuss whether the elite will allow it, to what extent they can stop it, and concludes that because they really can't, not without crushing and offending huge numbers and radicalising vast numbers of ordinary people as well, that in the end, when they see too late what's happening, they will provoke a war. They'll go to war to stop being replaced. The ones who are still there. They'll go to war if they have to. But the chapter concludes thus. We've spoken of war, and war will surely come one day. But Christians and patriots must do everything in their power to avoid it. In this coming generation, more than any other in history. Think about that for a moment while I have a drink of water. In fact, I'm going to repeat that because it's really, really important. We speak of war. We do on this channel. You know that. And war will surely come one day. But Christians and patriots must do everything in their power to avoid it. In this coming generation, more than any other in history. Because right now we need babies far more than we need martyrs. If that means we must sometimes bite our tongues, then bite them. If it means we must sometimes be struck and instead of lashing out, turn the other cheek, well, that recommendation comes from the very highest source. It is not yet our time, but we can be confident that our day will come. We are going to be subjected to oppression and injustice, but if we steel ourselves to endure the pain and to remain true and on course despite it, we may be sure not only that our revenge will be the laughter of our children, but also that justice and right will be restored by theirs. Theirs fault.